I found the notarized signature on my father's power of attorney 3 days after his stroke, and it wasn't his handwriting. In one afternoon, my stepbrother had signed away 40 years of my father's life while the old man lay in a hospital bed unable to speak. I didn't confront him in that hallway. I didn't cry in front of the nurses. I asked the notary's office for a copy of the file, thanked the clerk, and walked to my car before I let my hands shake. Marcus didn't know I'd already started keeping records of everything he'd done for the past 2 years. My name is Elena Reyes. I'm 46, and until that October, I ran the books for my father's restaurant, Casa Reyes, a place he'd built from a single taco cart in 1981, into the kind of restaurant that got written up in the city paper every anniversary. My father, Hector, raised me alone after my mother died, and when he remarried when I was 22, I welcomed his new wife's son, Marcus, like a real brother. He wasn't. Marcus had spent a decade drifting between failed real estate deals, always charming, always one signature away from his next big break. When my father's health started failing last year, Marcus suddenly discovered how much he cared about helping with Dad's affairs. The stroke happened on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Marcus had a document giving him full power of attorney over my father's finances and property, dated 2 weeks before the stroke, supposedly signed while my father was still lucid. I remembered that week clearly. My father had been at the restaurant every day, arguing with the produce supplier, tasting the new mole recipe, nowhere near a lawyer's office. I asked Marcus where the signing had taken place. He said smoothly, without blinking, downtown, at the notary near his old bank. You were probably at the restaurant that day. I let him keep talking. I didn't tell him I'd already pulled the restaurant security footage for that exact date and time, and it showed my father behind the register the entire afternoon, 40 minutes from the notary's office. I didn't say anything that week. I brought my father soup. I sat with him while machines beeped steadily beside his bed, his right hand curled uselessly against the blanket, his eyes tracking me even when his mouth couldn't form words yet. The wound in my chest wasn't just fear for him. It was the particular ache of watching someone build a family for 30 years, only to have part of that family turn the moment he became defenseless. I understood something early on that I'd carry through everything that followed. My father had stayed silent about a lot of things in his life, foremost among them how much he'd let Marcus borrow against the restaurant's credit line over the years, quietly, without telling me, because he didn't want to admit his stepson kept failing. 2 weeks after the stroke, I found the second thing. A distribution notice from the restaurant's business bank account, $41,000 transferred to an LLC I'd never heard of, dated the same week as the power of attorney. I called the bank pretending to need a statement reissued, and the representative mentioned, almost in passing, that Mr. Reyes's authorized representative had also inquired about refinancing the property against a private buyer's offer. Nobody had told me anyone wanted to buy the restaurant. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for a long time before I called my father's longtime attorney, a woman named Carol Whitfield who'd handled his business filings since before I was born. I didn't accuse anyone. I just asked her quietly to review anything filed under his name in the last 2 months. While Carol worked, I kept doing what I'd always done, running the register, ordering supplies, smiling at the regulars who asked about my father. Marcus noticed nothing different in me, which was exactly what I wanted. He grew bolder. At a family dinner, he mentioned casually that once things settled, it might make sense to sell the restaurant property and let Dad live somewhere quieter, somewhere without the stress of ownership. My stepmother, Diane, nodded along, though I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes, the look of someone who suspected her son was moving faster than grief should allow. I told Marcus that sounded like something we should all discuss once Dad could actually participate in the conversation. He smiled and said we didn't want to waste time waiting. Carol called me 11 days later with the notary's registration book. The entry for my father's power of attorney existed, but the notary listed had retired 18 months earlier and hadn't performed a single signing since. Someone had forged both the notary stamp and the log entry. Carol had also pulled the LLC's paperwork behind that $41,000 transfer. It belonged to a business partner of Marcus's from a failed condo project 3 years earlier, a man currently facing his own lawsuit for investor fraud in another county. The money hadn't gone toward my father's care at all. It had gone toward paying down Marcus's personal debt to keep that old business partner quiet. I still didn't confront him. Anger would only give him time to build a story. Evidence would end the story before he could tell it. I spent the next month collecting everything methodically. The hospital's visitor logs proving my father was hospitalized during the supposed signing date, the retired notary's sworn statement that she'd never notarized the document, the bank records tracing the transfer, and finally, a recorded phone call Marcus made to me one evening, thinking he was simply venting frustration, in which he said plainly that once the property sale went through, nobody would even have to know the paperwork was a little early. That sentence, on its own, told a judge everything the rest of the file only implied. My father's condition improved enough by December that his doctors cleared him for a supervised family gathering, a quiet reopening dinner at the restaurant to mark 43 years since he'd opened the taco cart that started everything. Marcus organized most of it, eager to appear as the dutiful son managing the family's return to normal life. He stood at the front of the dining room that night, glass raised, telling relatives and longtime employees how he'd stepped up to protect the family business during the hardest month of their lives. My father sat in his wheelchair near the head table, his speech still slow but his mind sharp again, watching his stepson accept praise for a crisis he'd manufactured. I didn't give a speech. I walked to Carol, who was seated quietly near the kitchen door exactly where we'd planned, and nodded. She stood and asked the room for 2 minutes, introducing herself as the family's longtime attorney with an update on the estate paperwork everyone had heard rumors about. She read the retired notary's statement aloud, calm and unhurried. She mentioned the hospital visitor log showing my father's exact location during the supposed signing. She didn't need to say Marcus's name. The dates alone did that. Marcus tried to laugh it off, saying there had clearly been some clerical mix-up, that he'd have his lawyer sorted out Monday. Diane, sitting beside him, had gone pale, quietly pulling her hand away from his arm. My father raised his good hand slightly, and the room fell silent for him instead. He said, slower than before but perfectly clear, that he was revoking every document signed in his name that he hadn't personally authorized, and that Carol would be filing an elder fraud complaint with the district attorney's office that week. He didn't shout. He'd never needed to. 40 years of building something honest had earned him a room full of people who believed him the moment he spoke. The fraud complaint moved through the county over the following 4 months. Marcus's forged power of attorney was voided by the court within weeks, the $41,000 transfer flagged for restitution, and the private buyer's offer on the property quietly withdrawn once due diligence turned up the fraud investigation. Marcus wasn't charged criminally in the end, the DA's office citing the difficulty of proving intent beyond the paper trail, but the restitution judgment against him was substantial, and Diane filed for a legal separation from the family's business dealings entirely, wanting no part of what her son had done. Marcus stopped coming to the restaurant. I heard through a cousin that he'd moved 2 states away, still chasing some new deal that would finally make up for the last one. My father recovered enough over the next year to sit at the register again most mornings, slower now, needing help some days, but present, still tasting every new dish before it went on the menu. I think about that hospital hallway sometimes, the version of that week where I might have screamed at Marcus the moment I found the signature, where the whole fight would have become his word against mine, instead of documents against a lie. I'm grateful I didn't. Quiet isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just where you keep the proof until the truth is ready to stand on its own. If you'd found that signature in your father's file, would you have confronted your brother that same hour? Or would you have waited, like I did, until the paper trail left him nowhere to hide?